So we're saving this for folks that can't be here with us. And, okay. All right, guys, thanks for coming out today. Before we get started with this wonderful session, I'm going to go ahead and thank our sponsors. These sessions are brought to you by the National Endowment for the Arts, the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, and also Davis and Elkins College. It's important to note that these sessions are sponsored, have great financial support from you, the Augusta participants, specifically those of you that gave in the early days when the pandemic was first striking the U.S. and it was we understood that there needed to be a fast and drastic change in the project in order to have a successful summer season. Some of you gave before that was even clear what that was going to be, and we've been able to put together this project thanks to your support. This session in particular is sponsored by the West Virginia Humanities Council. And for that reason, it is open to the public. We're going to be live streaming it on our Facebook page. Even when we're here in person, sessions that are sponsored by the West Virginia Humanities Council are open to the public. So if you're ever in Elkins during the 3 weeks that Augusta would be held, which is typically the first 3 full weeks in July, you can check out our schedule, and anything that's designated a West Virginia Humanities Council event, you are more than welcome to come up and join us for that event. This topic that we're exploring today, the interconnectivity between bluegrass and old time throughout the ages, where we're at right now and where we'll be up on the hill at Augusta when we can meet in person once again, is an interesting topic to broach right now while we're all in our homes, because my goal is that by the time we do come up here together, we're ready to jam, make music, and just have the best time of our lives. I'm ready to throw the biggest party known to man when we're learning face-to-face and knee-to-knee once again and having square dances in our dance pavilion. I couldn't ask for a more well-rounded and knowledged panel to have with us today. We have bluegrass mandolin player Mike Compton, Joe Newberry, who plays clawhammer banjo, but as far as I understand, runs a lot with the bluegrass crowd. So he straddles both worlds. Ben Townsend from right here in West Virginia, who is one of our old-time coordinators, but I know him also as from his country bands, Americana bands, bluegrass, from what I understand from the conversation before, and Rachel Eddy, who is also one of our old-time coordinators and also has a big hand in helping us with our October Old Time Week. We'll also be joined by bluegrass coordinator Ira Gitlin, who can help moderate this panel discussion. So below you in the middle, you'll see a button that says chat. If you have any questions, you can put them down there in the chat. This is going to kind of be a guided discovery type discussion. There is not a lot of agenda other than the topic itself. And before I turn it over to these guys, I'll say the t-shirts behind me, they're last year's t-shirts. Yeah, they're for sale. I'll even do a fire sale. I will say this. One of the problems that we have with this year's Augusta, since it's me, Emily, and Eric manning the helm right now, is shipping and handling has become a great challenge. Basically, it would mean that one of us has to get pulled off of whatever duty we're doing to make sure the programming is okay to do shipping and handling. But before I turn it over, I want to show you something real quick. I'll be advertising these a lot more heavily in the future once, maybe once this week wraps up or toward the end of this week when one of us can turn toward shipping them out. But here is the 2020 Augusta shirts. Augusta from home. So I do have some of these for sale as well. They're $30 and we'll ship them out worldwide, but we need to have one of us available to do that. One of the things we learned early on is that while we can do a lot, man, doing everything sure is a chore. All right, so with that said, Ira, I don't know if you want to say anything before we get started. I'll go ahead and mute myself. I will put a link to a survey for the West Virginia Humanities Council in the chat down here. That really does help us get funding. If you come here and enjoy yourself and you like to have these kind of discussions and you want to see more of this type of programming, filling out that survey helps us a lot. I will say that the West Virginia Humanities Council is very generous in this COVID year. They gave Emily and I our full grant ask, and to keep that that relationship continuing in that direction, the surveys from our participants are a big driver of that. All right, Ira, I'm going to hop off here and let you guys take over.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say that Neil Brown was planning on being here, and he will be here a little later, but he had an actual day job related phone call he had to be on. So he'll probably get here around 12:30 Eastern time. And I suggested this topic because it just made sense. There's so much that bluegrass and old time have in common, and there's so much that they differ on. And I think especially for students who are just getting into either style, this is something that I hope will enlighten them. I actually, in the course of the jam last night, the virtual jam, I had a side thread going on with one of the students who was saying, what makes bluegrass bluegrass? And I'm not sure what her original musical orientation was, whether it was old time or whether it was, she was from one of the other weeks, like Blues Week or whatever. But it's an interesting question, and we could also ask, what makes old time old time? So I just want to start. I've got some other ideas of things that I think we could discuss, but let's start with that because that's going to lay the groundwork for everything else. Rachel, can you unmute yourself also?
I can.
Okay, so and Mike, feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in. Does anybody want to start with that from either side? Bluegrass, old time, what are they? What defines them?
I mean, I can start, I guess. I have to hop off this call early anyway. I have a thought on that, and the thought kind of comes from not knowing that there was a difference for a really long time. I mean, I grew up playing music, and as Ben actually pointed out a few minutes ago, there weren't enough people in West Virginia to make a difference. Like if somebody played music, you just sit down and play with them, whatever it was. And I've kind of, it took a long time for me to realize that old time was a genre and that bluegrass was a genre. I just didn't, it all was the same. But in my experience in playing, the thing that stands out to me the most is, in a bluegrass jam, solos being offered around is this opportunity for individuals to musically transcend, and for the rest of the group, the jam, to kind of support them in that activity. Their solo is their expression and their something that can reflect their personality and can totally transcend. I mean, I've heard solos that have melted my face off, and that's when I go to hear a good bluegrass concert, I want to hear some really good solos. And then on the other end of that coin, I think in the old time camp, there are no solos. And instead, everyone kind of plays together in a group effort for a group transcendence. You play that old time tune 25, 30, 40 times sometimes. And, there is this round of it that'll just kind of lock and be perfect and just feel right, really feel connected and like the whole group is lifted up. And that's just an observation musically that I've observed that is a difference. And I love both. I personally, I'm a total wreck when I have to take solo. I'll do it and I can and it's fine. But I'm just like, no, you take one. It's not my favorite, aspect of playing. This is just a personal statement. But I definitely love to support other people in their efforts, and both bluegrass and old time music, to lift people up around me to play well is one of the things that is a commonality. It's just done, kind of approached from different angles.
Yeah, and I think that difference between that approach and bluegrass comes from the fact that bluegrass, even though people nowadays learn it from their family and friends because it's been around so long, that bluegrass actually started out as music that professionals were making to deliberately try to do something different. And it's kind of weird that in a way that I think bluegrass has become old-time music, in the sense that it has become the music that you learn from your family and friends, and that people are playing socially, often with no thought of ever going on stage or performing.
Right.
Mike, would you care to talk about that, since you are our Monroe guy, and of course bluegrass emerged from the sound of Bill Monroe's band in the 1940s?
Oh God, I think a lot of it is the stereotypes that we're using for old time and bluegrass is all. It's a lot of it is based on misconceptions, or at least maybe a bold example of a stylistic aspect of either one of the two. A lot of people say that Bill Monroe's music is about playing downstrokes really hard. That's only one small, about a nickel's worth of what Monroe knew how to do. And I've known some old time players who were younger and have based their whole approach to the genre based off of maybe an old recording of somebody who was way past their prime whenever they were recorded. And so that's the whole style to them. So it's, it's not the whole scope of the thing. It's just little pieces of it. And I guess I'm as guilty of it as anybody. There were no bluegrass songs. We were talking about it earlier. When Bill Monroe and his bunch decided they were going to play, he didn't have an idea what he was going to do. Everybody says, well, he's a genius. Well, that may be, but I don't think he had a clue what he was going to do. I think he kept trying different things, a lot of it based on old time music that he grew up with and black music and just a mix of things. And he tried everything he could think of to try to find something that would sell. So, I think what he ended up settling on was basically he was about a good enough salesman to recognize what was working, and he stuck with it.
And that thing that he found that worked was, you're talking about basically the 1945 to 1948 version of his band with flat.
Yeah, or just a little bit earlier. A lot of the earlier stuff was based on I think a sort of melding of old time string band and Western swing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the sock guitar rhythm on something.
Yeah.
Even the accordion.
Yes.
Most people don't realize that when Earl Scruggs made his debut with Bill Monroe on the Grand Ole Opry stage in late 1945, there was an accordion on stage next to him.
And her name was not Sally Ann, it was Billy, but you can only have one Bill in Bill's band.
Yep. And that showed up about 20 years later also, yeah, with Brad Keith. But you brought up an interesting thing about Monroe basing his stuff on what came before. So let's talk about like the first generation of bluegrass players were old time players in some sense.
All Bill wanted to do was be a fiddle player, but there was no fiddle left in the family of instruments. So he picked up the mandolin and tried to play it like it was a fiddle. I mean, which makes his mandolin style so unique.
And that's one of your pre-recorded lessons, isn't it? For the Justice Side? Yeah, interested in seeing that.
Can I just 1 second chime in on that? One thing that I like that I've been told by multiple musicians that I look up to is that new ingenuity and new styles come from trying to play the sound of one instrument on another instrument. And I think that's just another example, kind of like a Dale Potter kind of thing, where he was playing all three fiddles or trying to play the pedal steel part as a fiddler, that totally changes what goes on in Western swing and in country fiddling. It kind of becomes the norm. So that, for Bill Monroe to really be doing, traditional fiddle on the mandolin and also being a great salesman, a genre evolves out of one person's ingenuity, really, or largely.
Well, in some ways, for a long time, I think the old time scene was more open minded to playing different kinds of material than the bluegrass crowd is, because I guess in the formative years it was the tradition was guarded pretty heavily, and now it seems like most anything goes. But whenever I was first introduced to being around old time musicians more actively, it just blew the top of my head off. I thought, well, a lot of this sounds like what I'm used to, but it comes from a different place. And what's what Rachel was talking about. If you didn't know there was a difference, there wouldn't be.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot of my my old time fiddle sound comes from learning tunes at our local jam near Morgantown. The leader of the jam was a mandolin player. We didn't have a fiddle player. So this guy, like, he held on to that mandolin and it would just move up and down. He played it so hard, and he just played melody, and I never heard him play a chord in all those years. And I probably learned, like, 100 tunes, and the way he phrased things and shaped them on a mandolin was just kind of how I adapted it on the fiddle. And, I think that's definitely left a print just on my old time fiddle style. But to me, I was like, oh, a mandolin leading the jam. That makes sense, because, like half a dozen other jams were led by dulcimers or other, various things that aren't exactly what we think of, the front end of old time or bluegrass music. Instrumentation was really just whatever you had. An accordion goes.
Yeah, I want to bring up something I'm seeing in the chat. Pat has said, we always talk about Bill Monroe as the father of bluegrass. Who would have been among the first players to spin off and also call their music bluegrass? That's actually a kind of an interesting, I'd say theoretical question, is how do you decide when something is a genre? We might be dancing around that a lot for the rest of the hour, but if you have a pointy-headed intellectual side like I do, go check out Neil Rosenberg's book Bluegrass: A History, and I'll put a link to it in there, because that's kind of one of the underlying themes of his book, is the evolution of the notion that bluegrass actually is a thing, and what is it. And it seems that the first people to say, hey, there is this thing that's bluegrass, were actually fans, not performers. And most of the performers initially resisted being tagged with it, because the term bluegrass, comes from Bill Monroe's band, the Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and they were looking to develop their own identities. So people maybe in the early 50s were starting to call it bluegrass, but Louise Scruggs, Earl's wife, who did booking for the band, was unfamiliar with the term in the late 50s. So it took a while to catch on, and it was mostly at the fan level. But then there's this other question. When you talk about old-time music, that has evolved also. I mean, what people think of as old-time music today, it's a whole scene with its own ways of doing things, but how has that evolved from what people were doing in the 20s and 30s, which fortunately has been captured on recording? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Ben, do you have anything to say about that? I mean, I actually didn't realize that old time, like I said, was even a genre until not really that long ago. And I had already played for probably 12 years before I realized that it was a genre. And I have to confess, I'm not super well versed in early recordings, because I've just learned everything that I know from another person. I just am just old enough that YouTube never played a part in my musical, or, even like I had radio growing up, but I didn't have access to recordings. So, I don't know how the kids do it these days, but it's probably very much like it was, and that it's done in gatherings and on porches, which I don't have one. So, Ben.
And I think what you were talking about with like not finding out that there was old time music until you went to Clifftop, and like maybe about soloing and old time music and stuff, like I feel like the same about Clifftop, except that like 20 years later, I've kind of recovered from that. And I still think there's not a difference. And that, if there is a difference, to me, that's one big difference, is that I think a lot of people that are playing old time music are learning in a way that like neither Rachel or I, and I can't speak for the others, learned, you know. And so my desire was to learn the music of the people around home, because I could learn something that I couldn't get from a recording. So like if I came from learning blues guitar or whatever I was doing that was connected to popular culture and imitating people on TV or CDs playing AC/DC and ZZ Top and whatever, you know, then I found these people at home that played this thing, and that changed everything. And same as you, Rachel, like I've never desired to learn from a recording. And I see this idea, and it kind of goes to what Mike was saying about like the older fiddlers and different things, or like how I see people learning just the very beginning of what a fiddler would do on a recording, like the first A and B part, where like the sixth A and B part is totally different.
Right.
Like Sally Ann Johnson is a good version, like the way that Clark Kessler played Sally Ann Johnson. People think about that as like a 5 or 6 part tune. But if you really get into it, it's just the way Clark riffs over the melody. And I grew up around a lot of those Kanawha County players, and I grew up around Dave Bing and his brothers and that gang, and like, and I grew up around an old time music community kind of in the eastern part of West Virginia that is all connected to bluegrass. And so like maybe we're not stepping back and saying like, you take a break now, I take a break now. But in the middle of playing, like if I'm playing with Dave Bing, we're constantly
back and
throwing
forth.
snippets at each other.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, did you hear that? What are you going to do with that? And then it comes back. And it's not like, yep, we'll play this one for 20 minutes and then we'll play the next one. It's like, hey, we got this melody. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, there's a conversation in old time music that can be had.
And that conversation to me is like connected to the language of the region.
Joe, what you want to say there?
What Ben was talking about with Dave Bing, I've played with Bing where in the middle of the tune, it's just like Willie Mays doing the catch. It's like, holy moly. Being West Virginia, I can't speak for Mississippi, but I can speak for Missouri. Clawhammer banjo was not a big thing in Missouri. It was a lot of, I started out playing guitar with old fiddlers, but, you know, I was talking with Compton yesterday. Pete McMahon, the fiddler, would do, he would play, and his banjo player would do 3-finger rolls, no melody at all. But you talk about an exciting platform to let fiddle music just expand. The thing about bluegrass and old time, if you talk about the instruments, all of my favorite bluegrass fiddlers, really, if you put them in a different setting, they're old time fiddlers. You think about Kenny Baker, you think about I think about Benny Martin, I think about, you know, and also as an old time banjo player, to understand hearing Earl Scruggs in 1946 and hearing how exciting it was, you understand why people in old time banjoists in one growing season switched. It's pretty amazing.
Well, and you know, we think of that as like, you know, I've heard people often use the term the Big Bang of Bluegrass. Like this was where it all changed and it was all different from there on. But Earl Scruggs, you know, drastic a thing as his playing was, he was playing a regional old time style. There was this pocket of North and I guess a little bit of South Carolina where they played 3-finger banjo. And, you know, he might have polished it up to a level beyond anybody else, but he was an old time player. You know, he grew up playing Cripple Creek and Cumberland Gap and Home Sweet Home, you know.
Well, his breakthrough tune was Reuben.
Right. That was
Reuben.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know exactly what Joe meant by that, that was Scruggs started out playing thumb and index, you know, which was another common technique. And he knew that people in his area played 3-finger, but nobody ever showed him that. And then one day he was playing, and all of a sudden he found himself working in that middle finger that, you know, he had seen and heard used, and it happened that was the tune that he was playing at the time. He said that a lot in interviews and stuff.
I
There
don't
was
want to take
something
off
else.
on a total tangent, but we love to play the game in my bluegrass band in the van. We always love to play the game. What if Don Reno hadn't been in the Second World War?
Yeah, because he had approached Bill Monroe in 43, I think it was, 1943, but he had it was a question of whether he was going to be accepted into the Marines. There is in the Masters of the Five-String Banjo book, there is a wonderful photo of him and some army buddy in the jungles of Burma, and he's holding a guitar, and they're both, wearing fatigues. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess. But and then also the question of what he would have sounded like. We don't know what he sounded like before about 1948. You had something to say, Rachel? There?
I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself. I have an appointment at 12:30. This is my moment to exit. I wish I could stay. This is intriguing, and if my person doesn't show up, I'll be back.
Okay, well, thanks for all your contributions.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
Good to see you.
Bye. Same.
Hang on, I'm multitasking. I'm trying to type something into the chat.
Ira, while we have a second,
Yes?
you mind if I ask the panelists a couple questions,
Sure.
perhaps from more of the view of our participants when they come up here next Augusta? And there is bluegrass music and old time music happening at the same place and the same time. We have many new participants with us digitally this year, folks that haven't been able to be here in person yet. So just an overview if you've never been here. During the day, you are in classes with a master artist studying a specific instrument or a specific style, or other classes such as blacksmithing or rug hooking or looming. And in the evening time, it's probably one of the most vibrant scenes I've ever come across as a musician. There are jams of 60 people going on. There are jams of 2 and 3 people going on. One of my favorite things to do is walk the campus and listen to one jam fade into the next as I go around. It's just an incredible experience. So when participants come up here and we're going to be interacting with each other in these two styles, I wonder if there's any kind of insight into maybe how to recognize what's going on in a jam, or just how to understand how you can musically contribute to it so that everybody's getting the most enjoyment out of their experience. When we had this idea that that bluegrass and old time could happen in the same week, there were a lot of people that came out of the woodwork to say that'll never happen. You're not.
That was Neil's point, that they're so close that especially beginners might not really understand how they're different. And I hope Neil does join us, because I'd like to hear him elaborate on the arguments he was making, which had a lot of merit, but I think it also has a lot of merit to have the 2 weeks together. And if he does show up, I definitely I'd want to get him talking about that.
So as a participant, from a participant's vantage point, do any of you guys have any maybe insights or wisdom about the experience? I mean, everybody here knows what I'm talking about when I talk about the jam scene up here at Augusta. And we want to make sure that everybody's having just as good a time as possible. Everybody's learning as much as possible. I love the classes during the day, but when I was up here as a student, the learning definitely didn't stop outside of the classroom. I think there's a lot of valid learning that happens in those wee hours of the morning when you're in that zone of saying one more song, when you're jamming. So I don't know if we can kind of steer that conversation in that direction for the participants' benefits right now while we're in digital land.
Was that a question?
I was trying to figure that out myself.
A question I'd say, okay, Mike, what advice would you give to a a bluegrass mandolin player that wants to dive into an old time jam.
Get rid of the chop. Number one, get rid of the chop and listen. To me, it's old time is more about playing on the ones than it is on the andas. Bluegrass seems to be an offbeat music to me, where I've had better luck playing old time sounds. Number one, by sitting close to people who really know how to do it, and concentrating on the downbeats rather than the offbeats. But I mean, that's, you know, something we were talking about earlier before all of you folks came on. That's just only one really small piece of it. But that's what I would do. Chop chords are only good, and traditional bluegrass and some other instances, they don't work in old time. It's not part of the sound as far as I'm concerned.
Well, could you expand on that and talk about not just the mandolin, but the whole rhythmic groove, you know, what the guitar would do, and the other instruments as well, that would be a distinction between the two approaches?
Oh, goodness.
Or, I mean, not just you, but since you opened up that, you know, that,
Well, I mean,
as a band guitar player.
I didn't hear any old timer bluegrass until I was old enough. I had enough muscle to pick up a bale of hay. I grew up listening to Ray Charles and Mitch Miller and Herb Alpert and all that kind of stuff. And I really didn't hear any kind of string band music that I thought sounded like it was in tune until I started working farm work during the summer. And then I started hearing Armour and Smith, primarily because of where I live. But, you know, so I came to it mid-teens. So I kind of come to it from an outsider's point of view.
Well, how about you guys, Joe and Ben? If you can comment on the different kinds of grooves.
The first thing, if we're talking to people who are trying to decide, I've been looking at the chat, trying to decide which direction, which roots and which branches. You know, I like to say that the branches grow out of the same roots, but you know, it all gives shade. And I would say that things that Seth and Emily do are really smart to try and get people to respect what everybody's trying to do. For a long time, there has been this real divide between bluegrass and old time. It's one of the reasons why we're doing this session. And there was a lot of misinformation about it, to the place where people in the bluegrass world thought that you played old time music because you weren't good enough to play bluegrass.
That's just stupid.
It's just it's so uninformed. And on the other side, people in the old time world saying, well, they're all just wanting to play for themselves, you know, and all they're waiting for is their next break.
Yeah,
You know,
but egotistical show-offs.
I've spent a long time, you know, and Phyllis asked if I call myself an old time musician or a bluegrass musician, and Mike and I were in England a couple of years ago, and somebody came up to us and they said, "Oh, we love your bluegrass," and Mike and I both went like this, because we're a duo. We don't play bluegrass. We play a lot of the things that you would find in a bluegrass band, you know, a lot of the songs. But there's no way, unless you have that, you know, all of the instruments sort of going in one spot. So I play old time music and I write bluegrass music, and I'm okay sitting in that divide. I was at a festival in Mount Airy, and I was walking by one of those big honking bluegrass sessions, like 40 people playing something in A, and I happened to be in A, so I went up and I was just kind of on the side, and a guy with a Winston 100 hanging out of his mouth looked over at me and said, "Take one, Claw." So Claw took one, and that's the story of my life in a nutshell.
Yeah. Oh shoot, what was I? Damn, I had a really good point that just flitted out of my head right now.
I could just make a little.
Yeah, you go for it. I might not even get mine back.
I think one, and usually I say the opposite about old time music, where I'm like, I like to learn from people. That's a distinction that I make about, but I make it about how I learn every style. But I think in being interested about these styles of music, the more you know sonically, like the better. And there's a whole history of recorded music that, you know, we were talking before we started rolling the cameras and everything, and like we know that history. We're just able to talk about this, like, oh yeah, I heard that record where this guy did this thing or that thing, and it's referential. Like I was listening to a Danny Paisley record like recently where they're referencing something that came from a Jimmy Martin record, you know, 40 years or longer ago, and then that stuff's referencing the old time. And so the more time you spend listening to just different things and different old things, like I think people have a tendency to kind of go from the front back, and you're going to get a better picture if you start at the back and kind of go forward. And that helped me a lot.
Yeah,
I have a question about the groove, and you know, it's one of us to go back and talk about that. And in old time music, when you come like Seth was saying, you come on a session late at night. If you're hearing something really exciting, part of that old time music, especially, I'll let Mike and Ben talk about other things. But if you think of the beat or the groove as sitting in your chair, Plum, scooch to the front of your chair a little bit and sort of fall into it. That leading the beat just a little bit, that gives you a little bit of propulsion, especially playing old time music. But there's other places in Missouri that old time music, because it's based on like schottisches and reels, it's very prescribed and very square right on the beat. How about Mike and Ben for you on the groove of the beat?
All this bluegrass stuff is based off of that playing a really strong offbeat, and that's just simply a Bill Monroe aspect. I mean, not all of them did that or had somebody that played that hard. It sort of became a trademark of the music after a while, and really was playing with Roland White. I'm sure a lot of you folks know Roland, or at least have heard of him, one night, and there must have been 7 or 8 mandolin players on stage, and Roland was walking back and forth, and he started looking like he was getting tired of it, and his eyebrows were going down, you know, and he walked by me and he's doing like this, and he looked up and he said, "This gets to be like chopping wood after a while, don't it?" And he just kept walking. And I busted out laughing. But it does. You know, really, that's just something, a trademark of one man's style that has been over accentuated, and now it's not going to go away.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say before. Joe, you were talking about playing in England and people calling your music bluegrass when you didn't really feel it was. And this is maybe kind of a side issue, but that really represents the success of bluegrass at branding. I mean,
Yeah.
look at all these different styles that we play. You know, we play bluegrass, we play old time, I play in a Western swing band. People know that there is this thing called bluegrass. They might have really way off base ideas about what it is, but they know there is bluegrass. You say, I play old time music, they have no clue what you're talking about. You say Western swing, they don't know. But all of these, you know, mid 20th century styles that are all kind of related to each other, they know what bluegrass is, and they don't know any of the rest of it. And of course, if you're playing old time music, it's a lot closer to bluegrass than it is to the stuff they're hearing on top 40 radio. You know, it's not, you know, it's not Frank Sinatra, it's not Prince, it's, you know, so they're kind of in the ballpark there by you know, mainstream popular standards. And it just happens that bluegrass is the name that they've heard. Maybe that's like a trivial point.
Well, to me, it's really what I key off of is the way the phrases are put together and what the note choices are, as to what what type of music I like to listen to and how it fits. But you can't, again, that limits the whole scope of the thing. I live with an opera singer and classical violin player. She said there's the same kind of thing that happens in the classical world, oddly enough. Everybody's arguing about, well, who's authentic and who's playing it right and who's playing it wrong and all that. So, it's not just us.
Yeah. Oh, you get this. I think you get this in every niche genre.
Yeah.
And sad to say, classical music has become kind of a niche genre where it's not there in front of the mainstream public. And when you're in your own little world, these distinctions really, really matter to you. And they're, it's fighting words, I guess. One thing I started noticing.
I have to run.
What's that?
I have to get ready to teach, but I just want to make one point. So, like, talking about rhythm and talking about, the time and styles and stuff like that. Like, I play a lot with David Bass, and we play on that front edge of the beat. Where when we're playing, a lot of times when it's us with the band that knows to play with us, it doesn't speed up. But when we're playing with people who aren't used to playing on the front edge of that beat, they think we're playing faster than we are. And so it has a tendency to speed up. And that comes from what we like to do comes from like the round peak tradition. And if you think of round peak as it pertains to bluegrass, it's from the exact same era that we're talking about Bill Monroe. This was popular in the 50s and would have been contemporary with early bluegrass.
Explain what you mean by round peak for the people who are unfamiliar.
So round peak is like music from Galax, Mountain area of where North Carolina and Virginia, like when you're talking about Tommy Jarrell or, that sort of stuff. And so Tommy Jarrell is such a staple of what is old time music, but he was playing music that was popularized and became a genre at the same time as Bill Monroe. So like round peak and bluegrass are actually contemporaries in that way. Not necessarily old time, but one old time. They're just like, I don't think traditional bluegrass is like, after Tony Rice, what happened with Bill Monroe? These things change as they go along. And so I will I'll tune back into the video to see what comes of that, but I've got to run and get ready for a sound check, and I appreciate being here and really enjoy hearing from
joining us.
you.
We really appreciate your contributions, and go show them what they need to know next hour.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
While we're in a transitional time, I want to address a couple things that went by in the chat while we were talking. And, we'll monitor the chat. We also want to give the folks room to talk a little bit extemporaneously about this very important topic. As far as Augusta's old time offerings, Emily and I at the beginning of this year wanted to expand our old time offerings. We are, at least as our on D&E campus programming is concerned, need to fit those into a finite window of time. So I'll explain a little bit about the offerings, what their intent is, and why they are the way they are for just a moment. American String Band is a new week that we've put together this year, and it's an attempt to, not an attempt, it will expand old time offering too. That is all our old time offerings. First, let me preface it with this, are meant to be deep dives, right? So the week 2 American String Band offering is a deep dive into the interconnectivity between old time music and the blues. And so we're having old time musicians from around the U.S. come in while our blues master artists are on campus as well. And what that'll help us do is facilitate conversations like this in how the interconnectivity between old time and the blues happens in music as well. Then in week 3, we wanted to make it a West Virginia specific old time week. Most, if not all, of the master artists hired for that week are from West Virginia. We like to feature our younger and more upcoming master artists sometimes, and Ben Townsend and Rachel Eddy, I don't know if you know, but they jam all over the state, and they know just about every player in the whole state, so we couldn't be more thrilled with them as coordinators. Also, Emily and I have done quite a bit of work this year with the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, and they run a festival in the southern part of the state called, the colloquial term for it, and the term that most people know it as, is Cliff Top. So in our work with the state, we're always going to have alignment between an old time offering at Augusta and the Cliff Top Festival. If a visitor wanted to come to our state from another state or another country, they could have 2 consecutive weeks of very meaningful interaction with West Virginia old time music. They could come here to Augusta and learn from the masters, and then go to Clifftop and enjoy playing that same material with the masters down there. I wish Rachel Eddy was still on the call, because she has a wonderful vision for October Old Time Week. That is a deep dive into the material and regional signifiers. So the idea is this: if you take, let's say, an intermediate fiddle class, you will have 3 teachers from that class. The class will remain the same, but the teachers will rotate. You'll be learning material, the same material, but you'll be learning it from someone from Northern Appalachia, Central Appalachia, and Southern Appalachia. So you can take a deep dive into the regional signifiers within that material. It's an ambitious and large in scope, but we really, as a West Virginian, and Emily is someone that has had contact with West Virginia old time her entire life, we felt that it was important to expand on the style of music that is indigenous to our land here, and also take a broader look, both historically, politically, and contextually, in the ways in which the music that we know and love has evolved, continues to evolve, and where it's going in the future. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that are specific to any of those. I'll leave my email down in the chat, but I saw a couple of things fly by that asked about that. And if there's any first-time participants, I hope that clears it up. But if you have some questions, I'll leave it in the chat. Now, Ira, with the gang.
Okay, well, there's one of the comments in the chat was talking about how, as in the current old time scene, a lot of times it tends to be very much focused on instrumental tunes, fiddle tunes especially, and not as much on singing, although singing, of course, is a huge part of, well, any musical tradition. And somebody made some comment about, well, you should bust in there and sing one. And then somebody said, well, wouldn't that be like a jam buster? And I'm just going to say this is like just a bigger issue of every jam session, whatever its style, has its own personality. And those of you who are kind of newer to the whole jamming thing, it's really important to size up, what is this jam about? And if you don't know the people involved, if they're not good friends of yours, just try to fit in and figure out, are they all singing, 1940s Stanley Brothers stuff? Then you don't play your 7-chord Tony Rice instrumental in that jam. You wait for another jam where that's more appropriate. Are they all about fiddle tunes and they're going to play for half an hour in the key of A? Well, yeah, okay, go with that. So that's just my general thing. I also wanted to say that since we're coming to the end of the hour, I guess can we go over a little, Seth, if we want to, in this room?
Yeah, we can go over in this room, and
It's not going to affect Ben's class.
That if you do hop off and jump in on another session that's going on, this has been recorded and will be in the live events resources week 3 course for later viewing.
Yeah, I was going to plug what I'm going to be doing in a couple of hours. I will be interviewing Joe Mullins, our advanced banjo instructor, who, from my point of view, he's a youngster, but he has been in bluegrass literally his entire life, from birth, and we're going to talk with him about growing up with bluegrass. We're going to talk about the evolving role of radio in perpetuating and spreading music, and a whole bunch of other things, I hope. Also, slow jam tomorrow. There's slight change. Tyler Grant will not be able to participate, but Greg Blake will, and we're going to get somebody else in there. And also, I think Neil Brown has joined us, and he's just been kind of he's here, but he's not. He hasn't been chiming in. Hey, Neil. Everybody, wave to Neil, okay? Thank you. Now, where were we?
We were right here.
Okay. Let's see. I'm looking.
I used to live with a guy that played with Bill Monroe in the mid '70s. A guy named Bob Fowler from Alabama. Grew up around Steve Young and spent all of his time as a kid playing on Seven Bridges Road. At that point in time, I was learning how to play a bunch of stuff, and I asked him to give me a definition of what bluegrass is, because he loved to sit around in the evening and chain smoke Camel cigarettes and philosophize about all kinds of stuff. And so I said, well, define bluegrass for me. What is it? And he said, well, it's just in the notes. And I said, well, would you care to expand on that? And he never gave me an answer that made any sense, because he couldn't do it. He's the guy that's playing with the guy who's supposedly the creator of this whole genre. He didn't have an answer. He said, well, yeah, I just know it when I hear it. I'm like, okay, thank you.
But, that's not that much less than what some of the Bill Monroe interviews I've read. He said, put the notes in there right,
Yeah, well, I mean, but that pertains to other kinds of music too. It has a structure, and there are characteristics about it that make it what it is. But if you hear music being played and being able to stand and somebody walks up and says, okay, well, what kind of music is this? Well, it's old time. Why? And there you go. So you've put yourself out on a limb, and with no explanation. I mean, I'd just prefer to let the academics argue over it, and I'd just soon sit down and play some music instead of trying to say, well, it's this, and then you see, and the guitar player plays leading runs, and he strums on the downbeats, and blah 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 blah,
When
Yeah.
Eric Gibson and I were talking one time, and I told him about visiting an older player in Galax, and I said to the guy in Galax, I said, so in the 40s, did you call this old time? Did you call it bluegrass? Did you call it country? And he looked at me like this.
That's pretty.
Son, we called it music.
Did you write that song? Is that one of yours? Okay, that was the title cut of one of their albums, right?
Yep.
We called it music.
They called it music.
They called it music, yeah.
But it's there was a really someone posted in the comments about the singing. I wanted to return to that for a minute, because Monroe loved to sing, and would walk across those fields. If you ever want a really good history lesson about why Bill Monroe was the way he was, listen to Hartford's Cross-Eyed Child.
Yes, that's a great song.
It tells you a lot about how he built what he built. But in terms of singing in an old-time session versus a bluegrass session, I'm a big believer in this music is community music. Unless you see people like with their heads this far apart or sitting really knee to knee, that's when you say, because I've worked my whole life, whole musical life, to not always play. Sometimes it's better to listen and sort of scope it out. But if you're going to do a song in a session, and especially if you're a bluegrass singer doing old time or vice versa, make it to where everybody can grab it pretty quick. Like someone said, don't do a 7-chord song or a highly orchestrated number. Just there's a reason why Worried Man Blues is in existence. So anyway,
I think a lot of people look at bluegrass music as being a music that attracts people that have extreme technical skills anymore. And as far as the age group of the people that are just coming along, I mean, they seem to be so much higher in their expertise than people I grew up around used to be. There was nobody around that did, and now it's just unbelievable. I've got two young guys that are 11 years old each from different parts of the country that I can hardly stay ahead of. And, you know, it just
Tatiana, Harper,
boggles my mind, you know.
or Sierra Hull, or any of these young players. It just
But
in it.
really, you know, looking at one as being for people who have higher skill levels is not really doing service to the other, because I've got standing around listening to Bob Carlin playing banjo tunes one afternoon and playing minstrel things on the banjo, and I thought, my Lord, that's complicated. That's more complicated than any three-finger roll bluegrass thing that I've ever heard anybody do. And the skill levels and old-time players look at, you know, of course, Molsky and Rafe and Tatiana you were talking about. There's not a slouch among them. So, you know, to say that one is for people who can barely play is just hogwash. there's no basis in fact.
Neil, do you want to chime in on anything?
I'm just enjoying this. I got nothing to add. This is great.
Yeah, Neil, you know, is one of my fellow coordinators, and I believe Mary Burdett is also with us here somewhere. But Neil, I look to him as someone who has more contact with the old-time world, because his daughter is a fiddle player, and he's been going to fiddle camps with her for about the last, 9 years or something like that. So he's had a lot of opportunity to observe how they do things there. Okay.
And just to pick up on Mike's point, that, you know, a lot of these folks are studying this stuff at Berklee College of Music, and, you know, like these virtuosic players are taking up old time as their, you know, their focus under Bruce's tutelage, which is amazing.
I'm afraid to say anything.
I knew I was trying to get you to poke you with a stick, Mike.
No, I'm afraid to say anything. Everything that I've tried to learn how to do mandolin wise, playing in old time music, it revolves around Ella Haley's mandolin playing and Riley Puckett's guitar playing and a little bit of Bill Monroe swarpy kind of things that he did. Bill didn't just play chops, so I've borrowed some of that and tried to make a mutt that will blend in with almost any situation I can get into.
Yeah, but you know, you're talking about the rising technical level. Every generation does that. They build on what came before, and Bill Monroe was a huge part of that process. I mean, he's playing things at 160 beats a minute, or actually, I think some of the Monroe Brothers stuff is even faster. It's crazy.
It's about 175.
Yeah, and he's making his fiddle players play in B flat and D and E, which old time fiddle players were just not doing before that. And if you wanted a job with Bill Monroe, the great story I heard, maybe you know if this is true or not, that some fiddle player he had hired came to him one day and said, "Mr. Monroe, I'm having a real hard time playing this tune in B." And his response was, "I thought you wanted a job."
I haven't heard that, but apparently, according to, if you listen to him talk, he claims to have invented the little finger too. People didn't have pinkies until the 40s.
All right, we're all in his debt.
One of the things that we were talking about this a little bit in the jam session last night, about singing and about Hazel and Alice being at sessions and musicians playing with them, not wanting to do it in the keys that they sang in.
Ooh.
And Monroe weighed right in and said, "You get new people in your band. You got to sing the song where it sings for you." And that's a those the flat keys, they're just as good a music as any other.
They're not just for horns.
Yes.
I saw a video clip recently, Flat and Scrubs from late 50s, maybe early 60s. I think Hilo Brown was playing bass with them. But anyway, they're doing something in A flat, and of course Lester is capoed at the first fret and playing out of G. Earl is just playing out of A flat. And I think, on the in the jam yesterday, I posted that link to Lynn Morris band playing in A flat, and there's actually 3 different ways they're doing it. Lynn and Chris were capoed at the first fret. Marshall and I think it was Tim Laughlin on mandolin were playing really in A flat, and Tad Marks was playing as if he was in A on a fiddle, tuned down a half step.
Ooh.
Which he did because Lynn was famous among musicians for, I think Tom Adams told me he was at some festival playing with her, and in the course of the weekend, they hit every single major key at least once.
Wow.
So when Tad would go on the road with her, he would take 2 fiddles and he'd keep one tuned down so that he could get that great open string fiddle sound, but in A flat or D flat or whatever.
I see a question in chat, if I could jump on real quick, about getting elementary school children involved with acoustic music. I know Mark Panfil does some work in his local area. A lot of bluegrass, like a Gray Fox Festival, a lot of bluegrass festivals have kids academies, and which is a great way, once we can all get back to festival life, to look into. And there are a ton of camps around the country. It takes a little searching on Google to find a number of camps that will take smaller kids to, that get them involved. I've been doing this for a long time with my daughter, so there are a lot of resources. You've got to poke around a little bit, but
Yeah, and Mark Pinfield is here with us. So Mark, if you want to type in something in the chat, for them to get in touch with you, if you're willing, which I strongly suspect he is because he's that kind of guy. And and you can probably also talk to Mary Burdett about the Kids Academy at Gray Fox, which is kind of one of the big ones that got the whole movement started, back about 20 years ago.
Yeah. Mark's a hero to a lot of people.
There he is.
There he is. Good.
Well, I'm gonna, are there any last final thoughts here before we start to wrap up? I will say it's been a compelling discussion. Everything that I thought it needed to be. This is an open-ended conversation that will continue well into the future. So it's just the beginning of it. There are really no final or conclusive statements made here. It's just something that's the nature of art. It's ever evolving. It's people listening to those who came before them, melding them all together. All of us have separate influences, but it is what we say musically when we're together that makes the collective statement, as it were.
I want to say thank you, Seth, and Emily and Eric, for putting this week together, and thank you, Ira and Mary Burdett and Neil. And Compton, it's great to see you. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to actually make some music together, maybe really physically distanced, but we're going to work on that. And to everybody on the call, if you see me at a festival or a show or out there in the world, come up and we'll have a tune and we'll have a song. I look forward to that very much.
Same here. Thanks everybody for participating, and thanks also to Rachel and Ben, who had to leave a little earlier.
I said this earlier, I would appreciate you working with my schedule. and having me included in this. As far as the music goes, you see a jam session, I think probably it's a good idea to go up and try to fit in with what's going on and listen, because you'll find something really great that you didn't know existed. And if you have real strong opinions about what one form of music is over the other, just hang around a year or two and it'll all change. So Bill Monroe wasn't static, and I think it's probably a good idea to follow that example. If he has one aspect, I would say listen to it would be that one. If you hear something different, go for it.
Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone that you can save the chat. The chat will not save when we go over into when we archive this session. If you open up your chat and you look at the bottom right-hand corner next to File, there's 3 little dots. If you hit that, the top option is to save the chat. The reason I say that is because as I've been looking at it, there have been a wealth of knowledge via links go by in this chat. So if you'd like to save it and look for those links later, one of those links happens to be the survey that we use to fill out for the West Virginia Humanities Council that has sponsored this event. If you like this style of cultural sessions and would like to see more like it, both during our 3 weeks of programming and also beyond, meaning now that we have this platform, we have more of a year-round mindset for these types of discussions. Help us out by filling out that survey. It really helps us with the grant process. This session has been sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, and Davis-Uncas College. We need to give a special shout out to the West Virginia Humanities Council that sponsored this session in particular and makes it free and open to the public. I would also like to thank everybody in attendance today. You guys are the true heroes that really are making the wheels on the bus go round and round right now. Those of you that gave, any time, but particularly those early on in the early days when we knew we had to make a drastic transition to have a sense of gathering, to keep teachers teaching, to keep students learning, to keep communities connected, all of those endeavors that we're constantly trying to achieve really came to fruition in the digital world due to that early sponsorship by the Augusta participants. We are still accepting donations. Right now, our area of need is in a line that we've created called the Augusta Discretionary Fund. This is a line in the budget that Emily and I have created specific to Augusta that helps us in the transition from online programming into in-person programming. While it's very difficult to speak in absolutes about timelines during the fluid situation that we all find ourselves in now, I do want you to know that we are setting things up for a seamless transition from online back to in-person. We're going to take a safety-first attitude as we do that, and we'll continue to use every tool at our disposal to have programming and keep us gathering in the interim. So if I'll put my email address in here one more time before we sign off. If you have any questions about the content, about old time or bluegrass offerings up here, any musical offerings, any craft offerings, go ahead and give me a shout. My email address is youngas@dewv.edu. I say that out loud because I have trouble typing and talking at the same time. With that said, there's Ben Townsend is teaching a fiddle techniques course over on the Old Time channel. Let me just see real quick here. I'll tell you what's going on the rest of the day. We have, if I can get it up here. So we got the fiddle and banjo technique with Ben Townsend going on right now in the Old Time. At 3 p.m., we're going to have a cultural session. This is another one sponsored by the West Virginia Humanities Council, Growing Up Bluegrass with Joe Mullins. At 4 p.m., we'll have a slow jam with Rachel Eddy on the Old Time channel. 5 p.m. social hour / cocktail hour on the Bluegrass channel. Those are great ways for community involvement. I encourage you to pour yourself a drink at home and be socially close while remaining physically distant. At 7 p.m. on the Old Time channel, we have a song circle with Michael and Carrie Klein. And then I would like to remind everybody that our wonderful concert has been rescheduled for this Friday evening at 8 p.m. Each week has been something different come up that bumps that concert. It really is an animal all of its own. But I will say, one of the beautiful things that has happened is during that weekend time slot, there's a lot of people that are watching it, and it's amazing how it satiates these two things at once. Number one, it makes you feel like you're having a private living room concert with the master artist that's performing, but because of the chat feature when we premiere a concert, it gives you the sense that you're watching it with everybody else. So it's both like intimate and a big party all wrapped up into one. It's one of the most happy accidents that happened from this internet thing that we've stumbled upon. So go ahead and check that out. That'll be this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight.
Yeah.
Yep, and we'll see you around the internet.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.